Welcome to the SEI Podcast Series, a production of the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. A transcript of today's podcast is posted on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts.
Welcome to the SEI Podcast Series. My name is Suzanne Miller. I'm a principal researcher in the SEI Software Solutions Division. Today, I'm joined by my friends and colleagues, Pat Place and Stephen Wilson. Stephen is an Agile test engineer in the Agile Transformation Team, and Pat is a senior Agilist in the Agile Transformation Team. So we work together a lot, and I'm really thrilled to have them here today to talk about a subject that has been in the government space for a while, and that is Agile and something called EVM. If you aren't familiar with that, it means Earned Value Management. So before we get started into that topic, though, we usually like to ask our guests to say a little bit about themselves and what brought you to the SEI. And I like to ask, what do you think is the coolest thing you get to do at the SEI? And since you're new to us on podcast, Stephen, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so thanks for having me here, Suze, or Suzanne. I've got a lot of experience with a lot of different things. I've been with lead systems integrator, contractor. I've been in program offices. I've been, as I mentioned, contractor. I've also worked for the government directly for the Air Force. And so when I was looking for cool new opportunities up in the Pittsburgh area, I thought the FFRDC SEI would be a good opportunity for me to leverage all of these things at once. So I don't claim to be an expert at anything, but I do have I've touched a lot of it and interacted and been a part of a lot of different aspects of acquisitions. And I think you get to bring all that together here at the SEI. So
Agreed. Pat.
So back in the early days of the SEI,
Yes.
There was interest in formal methods. I think dinosaurs also roamed the earth at the same time.
Could be.
And that's what brought me to the SEI. And I think the coolest thing about the SEI is the ability to change. I came in emphasis on mathematics in software and have had the opportunity and the luxury of being able to look at a whole different scad of different things over the years. And that, I think, is super cool.
Yes, I would have to say that's on my cool list too. And you and I have worked on some of the same different things as we've gone through
Indeed,
our
we
careers.
have.
So
yeah, just to add to that, I think also the opportunity to work with really accomplished people. We get to spend a lot of time with different customers. And I think, and my colleagues at the SEI and also the people that we interact with, a lot of different people, they have a lot of different backgrounds, and there's a lot of smart people out there. And I enjoy learning from all of these different people I interact with at the SEI.
Learning mindset is, I think, one of the things that is common to many of us at the SEI and wanting to learn new things. So, all right, so let's dive into our topic. So this is a topic that is kind of focused on the acquisition aspects of software-intensive systems more than the technical aspects and the project management aspects. And we know that we are seeing more government acquisition programs using Agile methodologies. And we also know that they are often told they're going to use, even if they don't volunteer, to use techniques like EVM. And before we get into sort of the interactions of those, Pat, could you just give us a sort of one sentence version of Agile and a one sentence version of EVM? For those that don't understand or don't know these methods already, we will have a whole bunch of resources in the transcript for you to catch up on these two topics, especially EVM. A lot of the Agilists really don't know EVM.
Sure. So Agile is a set of principles, a set of practices that are really focused on helping you initially develop software and develop software that's going to meet the needs of the customers. Too many government experiences in the past showed we could develop lots of software, but no one would use it. EVM is a technique that actually dates back to, I think, the mid-'60s, which is focused on management, earned value management. And it's a way of assessing or using past history to assess progress and to use that past history and recent history to predict the future. And
Right.
some of the most important Predictions are how long it's going to take you to complete and how much it's going to take you to complete.
And one of the things that I've noted over time about the two, Agile emphasizes short iterations, delivery on a very short cycle of often a minimum viable product or something like that, the progression, where EVM also, you can use it in that setting, but in the settings I used it for in the 80s and the 90s, it actually focused on surrogates for progress as opposed to the direct product that was evolving. And that's one of the things that I think is one of the interactions that trips people up, is that you're kind of got a little bit of apples and oranges in terms of what is it that they're trying to actually deal with.
I think that's changed.
Okay. I told you, 80s and 90s.
Yeah. If I got into the weeds, I would say that work packages are focused on the accomplishment of actual work.
Okay.
And the completion of work packages is a good surrogate for progress.
Okay.
Especially if you have a set of, here's all the work I have to do, here's the work I've done, and this is what I'm currently doing. So I think you get a pretty good progress measure there.
That's good that it went beyond that, because that was not a very satisfying aspect of using it in those days. So let's talk about your blog post, which is one of the reasons that we're talking about this, is so that people will learn lots of things from your blog post. You outline 7 ways in which Agile and EVM positively influence programs. And I'd like to sort of just go through those a little bit here. What are the virtues of Agile and EVM together that are going to make it attractive for people that may not be using either one of those to think about using them together? Do you want to start us off with a couple of those,
Yeah,
Stephen?
sure. So fortunately, I was anticipating this question, so I did write those down. We have big design up front versus planning as late as possible. Mm-hmm. To me, this really resonates with where the two methodologies at least appear to clash a little bit, and that's one of our. If you get a chance to look at the blog, that's an important section, I think. We have assessing feasibility, where we kind of compare IBR versus an MVP. We also have how far down into the hierarchy of Agile work does the EVMS track. You often hear about epics, features, and stories, and maybe tasks even below that. Does the EVMS system, should it track all the way down to that lowest level, or is that minutia? Resolving the tension between relative and absolute estimation. And I think that was one that Pat was particularly interested in. Pat, do you want to close out the other 3, or you want me to keep going?
Hey, you might as well. You've got them.
Okay. We also have words matter, agree early. Maybe that sounds kind of like overly simplistic, but we have seen where terminology throws people off. And the terminology that the Agilists are comfortable with and the EVM folks, the program managers, sometimes they have a different interpretation or different nuances of what that means. Right. And when those things don't align, you get a problem there. So that's one of the other things we explore. What's the right amount of administrative review when doing BCRs, baseline change requests? So do you need to do a baseline change request review board? Does it need to be as formal as I've seen in some of the programs I've supported? When you have all of the experts there at, say, like a PI planning event, do you also have to do an additional BCR review board? And then lastly, we have assessing progress, where we explore, percent complete versus
story points completed.
Yes.
Things like that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned relative and absolute estimation, and I think that's one of the areas where trying to resolve the apparent conflict in those is probably going to be important to people. Pat, do you want to talk a little bit more deeply about what are the issues and interactions between Agile and EVM in that case?
Sure. When you set up any earned value management project, EV project, you have to assign budget to various lines of work. You have to assign a scope to those with the associated budget. And some of that has to be done fairly early on in the development. Goes back to the big design up front. Now, you can set up, here's just a big bucket and we'll draw from that. But there's still, when you start to break stuff out, you've got to break it out into budget specifically, and the scope. And the budget will depend upon that scope. But the budget is always estimated in terms of hours, or hours translated into dollars, and maybe other things that you have to purchase. But it's what we focused on is the distinction between that sort of hours estimate versus the story point estimate that you would do in a purely agile program where that's not quite as important. So there's a huge tension here between these two methods. And what we do is basically say, well, it's up to you. I mean, you in your project, in your context, will have to resolve that tension between these two different constructs that are looking at the same thing, hours and story points. And there's no right answer. There'll be a right answer for you.
My experience is that we tend to, in the government at least, the story points aspect of Agile, the relative estimation of Agile, tends to be at the small team level. And that goes back to another area of interaction is how far down do you go? Because if I'm really only using relative estimation at that team level, I may not really run into as much of a conflict because I'm already using absolute estimation at higher levels. Is that a pattern that you've seen?
Yes and no. Good answer. The problem is that if you're following all of the principles of earned value management, you have to not only look at your work breakdown structure, but you have to look at your organizational breakdown structure. And that will get you to the team level.
Okay.
And so now the team's estimates are immediately important again, because I have to create different work packages for different organizational structures.
Gotcha. And so then that means that if I'm using story points, I need to translate them if I'm going to, in some way, if I'm going to be consistent with the sort of hierarchy going up.
And there are pretty standard ways of doing that. Sure. One of the commonest we've seen is make one story point equal an ideal day or half of an ideal day.
Right, I've seen that too.
I think we've all seen that.
Yep.
And then you get that translation, but it also loses the value because you already estimated the number of hours that were going into this project, and so those story points become less relevant.
Sure. Okay. So estimation leads me to then progress, right? I've estimated what the work is going to be, and then we execute the work, and we need to measure the progress of the work. So why don't you talk a little bit about sort of that? What are the different ways of measuring progress in Agile and EVM that are typical, and how you've seen those get resolved?
Yeah, good question. So I don't know how you escape in acquisitions. At some point you have to say, here's what the end goal is going to look like, right? We often call that big design up front. And in certain contexts, you have to say, somebody, some boss, some leadership somewhere says, how big is this and how long is it going to take? And so EVM works, I believe, well with that. Traditionally it does, where you define really upfront what you think your endpoint is going to look like. And then EVM measures the cost and schedule as you arrive to that point. Did you hit your mark? You've made a plan. How well did you arrive at that plan? Typically based on the cost and schedule to get to that point. Agile, on the other hand, is looking at generally a closer up planning, and it really encourages demonstrations and iterative development. And at the end of these different time boxes, you have a chance to review the product. And so you're often reviewing. You're looking at actual product versus the documentation that shows as you're arriving with EVM.
And when you see, one of the things that I've seen with that is that the Agile, the EVM approach, the traditional approach, big design up front is really is mostly what I call a sunny day, right? Estimate. And that's traditionally what that's looked at. And where Agile,
It's never right.
it's never right. And
Yeah,
that's part of the thing is EVM helps us to see that we're deviating from that, and that it may be time to relook at what have we learned and what's going swimmingly and what isn't. Whereas Agile is looking at that all the time, right? In terms of what do we learn, but it's like every 2 weeks or every week or whatever our iterations are, we're looking at what did we learn, what do we need to do next, and making sort of more small adjustments in many ways. Where I see in programs that are not Agile, they're really the points at which you make those we need to do something different tend to end up with greater difference between where we are and where we need to go next. How do you help the Agilists understand how to communicate, with the EV people to say it's okay that we're deviating these small amounts because that's learning, and how do we account for that in the EV? Because I think that's, if you can account for that, then people are feel a lot better about EVM and Agile together.
Sure. And I think if you don't break out all of your work packages on day one and have this plan that is set from now to the end of time as a set of work packages, then you have some options. And earned value certainly allows that. You can keep a lot of work in planning packages rather than work packages. And you can keep a lot of money in management reserve and deliberately keep that so that you can fund things as you do that learning.
Right.
I think from an earned value perspective, once you've broken something into a work package, then it's the learning is limited.
Right.
And you will get the cost variances and the schedule variances as things go well or awry. Usually awry.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. So
But no, I really wanted to focus on this. You can delay that development of the work packages until quite late on. And there has been some discussion within the government that says, we're actually going to break one of the standard EV guidelines. And where we'll break it is we'll actually allow work to start before the work package is fully formalized. Now, we don't want it to go all the way.
Yeah.
But if you formalize a work package that's expected to cover a 3-month period in the first week or two, that's kind of okay. And this allows you, I think, to get a lot of that learning.
Okay.
You still have a sense of, here's my backlog. We can adjust our estimate to complete based upon learning, but we don't get those sort of little variances at that niggling level.
And that's the other thing. How it comes down to how far down do you go, right? Because Pat and I worked a program where they were having work packages that were at the iteration 2-week level, right? In terms of timing, and so every time there was a variance of some percentage, which happened a lot, somebody was spending all their time creating the variance report and explaining this variance, which really wasn't as much of a variance as it was, look at all the stuff we're learning. Yeah. And so that became an administrative burden that was very, very onerous. And I know for that program, we recommended that the work packages sort of go up to a 3-month level. Is that something that you're seeing as more of a standard now in the government, that you kind of try and keep those work packages and planning packages at a high enough level that you don't end up with this really, really in the weeds variation?
Yeah. So guidance suggests that the lowest level your earned value should track is to what we call a feature. Now, they don't actually define how big a feature might be.
Sure.
But typically, from the earned value perspective, you want those work packages to be in the 1 to 3 month range and roughly corresponding to the feature level. It's not always 1-to-1, one feature, one work package. There are distinctions. Go back to you might have a feature that's worked on by multiple teams. From an earned value perspective, that means it's got to be 2 work packages, one per team.
Yeah.
But again, the duration is not that long. And so having duration of work packages to the 3 monthly period is about right. But from an overall, if you want to have Agile and EVM work well together, from a contractor's perspective, if they can measure progress, which is where we started this question, by completion of the work package, then they can get their money for they can get money for
progress payments.
The progress payments.
Yeah.
And we can measure completion of a work package by completion of a feature. It's done or it's not done, and that makes the percent complete calculation trivial when we've got that sort of mapping. We can even do that mapping even if a work package contains multiple features, because we can see how percent complete each is based upon their story points to overall estimate of work.
Okay.
So in that sense, I think there's some good movement and some really nice synergy between Agile and EVM.
Yeah, I like what Pat said. So you're touching on something that's important. Generally, what I've seen in the guidance is that at the feature level, that's what you want your EVMS, your Earned Value Management System, to track. And a feature for me may not be a feature for you, right?
Sure.
That's one of the
that
things
goes back
we
to
explore.
the words.
Yeah, the terminology.
Yep.
But in general, a feature is something that is can be executed within 3 months-ish. And it's something that is measurable, that you can see some value added by that feature.
Right.
Going all the way down into maybe like 2-week iterations to track those with the EVMS, as you said, can be very tedious. And oftentimes you're measuring something, but you're not actually seeing any significant development that you can say, yes, we're on track, or no, we're not.
Right. Yeah, that was a big learning for me. What is the most surprising thing that you learned in doing this work in terms of how Agile and EVM interact? And I'll give you a second, because I know that's not something we talked about at the beginning. But
Actually, to me, the most surprising thing is how flexible earned value management actually is.
Okay.
When you look at the guidelines, there's a lot of opportunity for interpretation. Previously, I have met some earned value management people who will have espoused a lot of ideas that would be utterly antithetical to an agile development. You'll probably still meet those people out there, but certainly what I'm seeing in terms of government guidance is much more in terms of how to make these systems work together. And like that flexibility as to can we allow work to start before the work package is actually formally instantiated.
Okay.
Yeah, so don't tell anybody I said this, but from my background, I didn't really like EVM, to put it nicely. It was something that me and my colleagues, and even some of the PMs that I had worked with, we doubted its value. What is this giving us? And so that was my bias as I came into the SEI and I started getting in these working groups talking about EVM and Agile. And I guess one of the stereotypes that, this is probably what surprised me, is that I oftentimes thought of the EVM experts as being closed-minded. I only want to do it this way. I want to have, they're very set in their ways. And what I have learned as I interact with experts in the community, really capable people, again, is that they're very open-minded. They do want to see Agile and EVM work together. They are not just buried into the dogma that they grew up with.
Right.
Again, it's the people that shocked me for the best. Yeah.
Well, and I think this is one of the reasons that podcasts, blogs like this are important, is because people do have stereotypes for Agile as well as EVM, and giving people better information about what's possible, what's feasible, and what people have achieved is important. I know, when I first learned EVM back in the 80s, I was very excited about it, because up to that point in the projects I'd worked on, it was very hard to demonstrate any kind of progress. But I quickly learned that the way I interpreted even the guidelines they had then and the way others interpreted it were very different. And so I think one of the things that I would take away from this is, if you're dealing with somebody on either side, the Agile or the EVM side, that are that you feel are dogmatic, go back to some of the source materials and, or find some of the experts that have published things on sort of flexibility so that you can help people get through. I find a lot of times the closed-mindedness is actually because of lack of experience or lack of really deep knowledge. And if you can help people get past that, then you can help them to understand better, how to make concepts like this work well together. So this is one of the reasons I was excited to do this podcast. So are there cautions that you would give acquisition professionals that want to incorporate Agile and EVM together? What are the things to sort of the gotchas that you want to watch for? I mean, the word, I go back to make sure your words are clear, your terminology is clear, but there's some other particular cautions that you would want to highlight. Pat, why don't you go with that first?
So a certain amount of the blog post focuses on the tensions between Agile and EVM. And the goal of our blog post was not to say, here's the solution. It's, here are the questions you should be asking yourself when you embark upon this journey and coming up with the answers. And I'm not the only person who believes this, but I am strongly believe that how you marry Agile and EVM is extremely situationally dependent.
Sure.
So the answer that works for this program is not going to work for that program. It's going to be a let's work our way through it. There's no standard path for this.
Right.
You make your own answers in your context. And I think if we spend a little more time developing guidance on how to tailor these two methods to work together, then I think we have an interesting way forward.
Excellent.
Yeah. Talking about a gotcha. I guess it's important to know that EVM, yes, there's. I totally agree with Pat, and that's what we said in the blog, as he mentioned. There's no exact way to do this.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you can't go wrong, right? There's plenty of wrong ways to do this, and there's right ways to do it. I think the first thing I would tell somebody, if thinking about myself when I was in a program office, is at least be aware of the fundamentals of what EVM and what Agile are trying to do. And then as you understand that, you kind of understand where the perceived incompatibilities are. And then you can kind of forecast, okay, I see where we're trying to go with EVM. I see where we're trying to go with Agile. You can kind of start to predict, where your problems are going to be. And then, understand that early so that you can start to work on this path forward early. And shameless plug, I think we explored that pretty well in the blog, especially in the intro section. So might be something that people want to take a look at.
Excellent. I know I resonate with that because I've worked on programs where the EVM system wasn't really developed until they were well into the EMD, the engineering, manufacturing, development phase, which is when you're supposed to be applying it. But they were still working out all of the how is this all going to work together with Agile, and it was pretty. There was some trauma and drama involved in trying to get people at a point, of doing new things when they should have started them 6 months or even 9 months ago.
So I think there's a time to resolve it, and it is at the IBR, the initial baseline review, because that's required to occur within 180 days of a contract award. You usually haven't gone too far into your development if it's a large-scale program. And I think that's a good point to resolve the how are we in this program going to marry Agile and EV together. And we're doing that now. We have an IBR where we're going to be invited coming up in a month or so's time, where we will be asking exactly those questions.
Okay. Well, that may take me into another question, which is, when you think about transition, what are some of the assets that you're looking at building or, helping people with? What are some of the assets that are there now to help people that are approaching this? And then are there things that are particular to the SEI that you want people to know about? I know that both of these, Agile good Lord, there's,
Yeah.
gazillion resources on Agile. EVM, maybe not quite a gazillion, but there's a lot. Anything in particular you want to point people towards?
Yeah. Are we allowed to point people towards the SEI website? Because there really
Absolutely.
are. I mean, that's one of the places I start when I'm doing research and I want to learn something. Is there's a lot of good material on there. Yeah, and if you're interested in EVM and Agile, then again, check out the blog. If that's something, we talk about a lot of these common issues that you have. So maybe start there for people.
Okay. Any other things you'd recommend, Pat?
There are other resources out there, but they're not widely advertised yet. So it's a bit premature to say that.
Okay.
But there's some interesting groups of people to which we've been invited, rather luckily, who are having the kinds of discussions I think you need to have. It's not really open yet.
Okay. All right. And that's something that we can, if some of those become more open to the public, we can add them into the transcript.
Yeah. Without naming names, I'll give an example. I went not that long ago to some Agile and EVM training issued by a branch of the government. And it was very, very good training on how to do Agile and EVM together. And we've since had some discussions back and forth between the course developers and ourselves on potential improvement. So the stuff's out there. It's just not fully prime time.
Sure.
There's NDIA guidance that resonated with me that I looked at. I think I read it twice as I was doing research for this blog, actually. So, and I forget the full name, but NDIA, EVM, and Agile, and you Google that, you'll find it.
Yeah. And that'll be mentioned in our transcript as well.
Perfect.
So we'll make sure that's there. So I know Agile and EVM is not the only thing you guys are working on, because I work with you on other things too. But what is next for you guys in terms of either taking Agile and EVM farther, or some other areas of research interest that you might come back and do another podcast for me in a couple of months?
Yeah. Who goes first?
You started it. You go first.
Well, I guess I'm not branching too far off. I am in the Agile Transformation Team after all. So I'm kind of staying in the Agile, but I'm working with a couple of programs that are doing risk management, trying to reinvigorate risk management. And I think what I'd like to do after discussions with my colleagues is kind of explore risk management in an Agile development environment. I think some of the guidance that I think there's some holes in some of the guidance that we can help mature that.
Okay, fair enough. How about you?
Yeah, I'm still really interested in asking a different question. And the question is with respect to, is something releasable vice? Has it achieved some level of minimum functionality? So I want to go up against the one of the uses of minimum viable product of it has to do at least this much.
Right.
Because I think that's just the wrong question.
Okay. All right. That'll be fun.
Yeah, I hope so.
We'll have some interesting conversations on that. All right. I want to thank both of you for joining me this afternoon and helping to clarify some of these relationships between Agile and EVM. I know that this is an area I had some misunderstandings of how EVM has evolved. I'm sure others do as well. And I really am happy that we're writing about this and putting information out about this to the government and to the larger audience. And with that, I will say thank you to our listeners for being with us today. And if you don't know where to find our podcast, we have video and audio. We have Google, we have SoundCloud, we have Spotify, we have, don't forget Apple, lots of places that you can get our information. And we encourage you to use whichever of those works best for you. As we've said multiple times, this one will have a lot of resources referenced in it because this is a very rich topic. And so I do want to thank all of our listeners and have a very good day.
Thanks for joining us. This episode is available where you download podcasts, including SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, and Apple Podcasts. It is also available on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts and the SEI's YouTube channel. This copyrighted work is made available through the Software Engineering Institute, a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. For more information about the SEI and this work, please visit www.sei.cmu.edu. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.